Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Summer brought a USB drive to court. Nikki defeated Victor in the divorce case. The young and the restless unfolded like a seismic explosion in Genoa City, a moment so shocking, so emotionally devastating, and so utterly irreversible that it redefined every power dynamic the Newman Empire had rested on for decades, because what began as yet another icy, high-stakes courtroom showdown between Victor Newman and Nikki Newman, two titans locked in a marriage-turned-war, suddenly transformed into a public reckoning that stripped Victor of his greatest weapon, control. The courtroom was already thick with tension as Victor sat tall and unflinching, radiating that familiar, ruthless confidence, certain that once again he would outmaneuver everyone in the room, while Nikki, outwardly composed but inwardly trembling, braced herself for what she knew would be Victor's relentless attempt to paint her as unstable, unreliable, and unworthy, the same narrative he had wielded like a blade for years. Yet everything changed the moment Summer Newman rose from her seat. Her voice steady but burning with resolve, clutching a small, unassuming USB drive that carried the weight of secrets powerful enough to bring a king to his knees. No one, least of all Victor, saw it coming. The judge paused, the attorneys froze, whispers rippled through the gallery, and Victor's eyes narrowed with suspicion as Summer declared that she had evidence directly contradicting Victor's testimony, evidence proving not only manipulation but calculated emotional abuse, financial coercion, and a deliberate attempt to sabotage Nikki's credibility during the divorce proceedings. The room seemed to stop breathing as the USB was handed over, and when the first file played on the courtroom monitors, the illusion of Victor Newman's invincibility began to shatter in real time. Recorded phone calls revealed Victor privately instructing his legal team to dig into Nikki's past relapses, not for concern, not for truth, but explicitly to weaponize them in court to ensure her humiliation and defeat. Emails followed, cold and clinical, detailing how Victor had secretly frozen accounts Nikki relied on, then positioned himself as her savior, only to later accuse her of financial irresponsibility under oath. Gasps echoed as video footage surfaced next, showing Victor in his office, dismissing Nikki's emotional distress as useful leverage and chillingly stating that a woman who doubts herself is easier to control, words that hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Nikki's hands shook as tears filled her eyes, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming validation that her pain, so often dismissed, was now undeniable proof that her marriage had been a battlefield where love had long ago been replaced by domination. Victor attempted to object, his voice sharp, but for the first time the judge silenced him, reminding him that the evidence spoke for itself, and in that instant Victor's carefully crafted narrative unraveled completely. Summer, standing tall, revealed that she had discovered the USB while investigating discrepancies in Newman Enterprises' internal servers, initially suspecting corporate sabotage, but instead uncovering a personal war being waged behind closed doors, a war Victor never intended to see the light of day. She spoke not just as a granddaughter, but as a woman refusing to let another woman be crushed under the weight of a man's unchecked power, and her words resonated far beyond the courtroom walls. Nikki then took the stand again, this time transformed, her voice steady, her posture unbreakable, as she confronted Victor directly, recounting years of emotional manipulation, the subtle gaslighting that made her doubt her own strength, the cycles of control disguised as protection, and how each relapse was not a failure of character, but a symptom of living under relentless psychological pressure. The judge listened intently, the gallery silent, as Nikki's truth, backed by irrefutable evidence, rewrote the story Victor had spent years telling. Victor, cornered and exposed, tried one last time to assert dominance, insisting that everything he did was for the family, but the words rang hollow now, stripped of their usual authority, because the USB drive had revealed the truth beneath the rhetoric: fear, control, and a desperate need to win at any cost. When the ruling finally came down, it felt less like a legal decision and more like a cultural shift within Genoa City itself, as the judge ruled decisively in Nikki's favor, citing Victor's documented manipulation, abuse of financial power, and lack of good faith, awarding Nikki not only a substantial settlement but full autonomy over assets Victor had long claimed as leverage. And in that moment, Nikki Newman did not just defeat Victor Newman in divorce court, she reclaimed her identity. Victor sat motionless, stunned, the weight of public defeat settling over him like a shadow he could not escape, while Nikki exhaled a breath she had been holding for decades, her victory not born of revenge, but of truth finally spoken aloud. Outside the courtroom, the fallout was immediate and explosive. Whispers turned into headlines, allies questioned their loyalties, and for the first time the Newman empire showed visible cracks as Victor's children grappled with the reality that their father, the man they had feared and admired, was capable of such calculated cruelty. Summer, though shaken, stood firm, knowing she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, yet also knowing that silence would have made her complicit. Nikki emerged not as a victim but as a survivor, her quiet strength resonating with every woman who had ever been told she was too weak to stand alone, and as Victor watched her walk away, head high, unbroken, he realized too late that power built on control always collapses when confronted by truth. The USB drive, small and ordinary, became a symbol of reckoning, proving that even the mightiest can fall when secrets are dragged into the light, and as Genoa City buzzed with the aftershocks of Nikki's stunning victory, one thing was clear. This was not just the end of a marriage, but the end of an era, because Nikki Newman had finally defeated Victor Newman, not by destroying him, but by refusing to be destroyed herself. The aftermath of the ruling did not fade quietly into the background. Instead, it detonated across Genoa City like a delayed shockwave, each ripple exposing new fractures in relationships that had long been held together by fear, loyalty, or convenience. As Nikki stepped out of the courthouse into the blinding flash of cameras, she felt something unfamiliar yet intoxicating settle into her bones. Freedom. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust toward her like weapons hungry for confession, but Nikki did not flinch. She simply raised her chin and said, with a calm that stunned everyone, the truth finally had its day. Those 6 words traveled faster than any headline, cutting through decades of whispers about relapse, weakness, and dependency, reframing her narrative not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to survival. Inside the courthouse, Victor remained seated long after the room emptied, his legal team murmuring anxiously around him, but their voices sounded distant, muffled, as if underwater. For a man who had built his empire on being 5 steps ahead, the sensation of being outmaneuvered by his own granddaughter, no less, was almost unbearable. His mind raced not with regret, but with calculation. Who knew what, how far the damage extended, and whether this defeat could somehow be reversed. Yet even Victor Newman could not undo what had been witnessed, recorded, and ruled upon in open court. The mask had slipped, and Genoa City had seen the man beneath it. Summer, meanwhile, stood apart from the chaos, her heart pounding as the adrenaline began to fade and reality set in. She knew she had crossed an invisible line, one that would forever alter her relationship with her grandfather and possibly with the entire Newman clan. Kyle found her near the courthouse steps, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "You just took down Victor Newman," he said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might summon retribution. Summer exhaled shakily. "I didn't do it to take him down," she replied. "I did it so he couldn't keep hurting her." That distinction mattered to Summer, even if the rest of the world would frame her actions as betrayal. She thought of Nikki, of the countless nights she had watched her grandmother struggle under the weight of expectations and judgment, and she knew that no matter the consequences, she would make the same choice again. Still, fear lingered, because Victor Newman never accepted defeat lightly, and Summer understood better than most that his silence was never surrender, it was strategy. Back at the Newman Ranch, the ruling ignited a firestorm of confrontation and soul-searching. Victoria, pacing the living room like a caged lioness, replayed the courtroom footage on mute, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. She had built her life around the belief that her father, though ruthless, was ultimately justified in his actions, that his harshness was a necessary evil to protect the family. Seeing his words laid bare, cold, manipulative, undeniably cruel, shook that foundation to its core. Nick arrived shortly after, his expression grim. "You can't keep defending him," he said bluntly, breaking the heavy silence. Victoria bristled. "You think I don't see what this looks like?" she snapped. "But he's still our father." Nick shook his head. "Being our father doesn't excuse what he did to Mom." The word hung in the air, Mom. No longer Nikki the liability, but Nikki the victim, Nikki the woman who had finally fought back. For the first time in a long while, the Newman siblings found themselves divided not by corporate power struggles, but by a moral reckoning they could no longer avoid. At Society, where Genoa City's elite gathered under the guise of civility, conversations hushed whenever Nikki entered the room. Some offered tentative smiles, others outright admiration, but the undercurrent was unmistakable: respect. Phyllis, never one to miss an opportunity for commentary, cornered Nikki near the bar. "You know," she said, raising her glass, "I've seen a lot of courtroom drama in this town, but that was legendary." Nikki allowed herself a small smile. "It wasn't about winning," she replied softly. "It was about ending something that should have ended years ago." Phyllis studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Just don't underestimate Victor's next move." Nikki's gaze hardened, not with fear, but with clarity. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous development of all for Victor. Elsewhere, Victor retreated into his office at Newman Enterprises, the walls closing in as headlines scrolled across his tablet, each one dissecting his downfall with merciless precision. Investors called emergency meetings, board members whispered about liability and reputation, and for the first time, Victor faced the possibility that his personal actions could jeopardize the empire he had built brick by brick. Adam, watching from the shadows, felt a complicated surge of emotions. Part of him relished seeing Victor exposed, stripped of moral authority, yet another part recognized the precarious position this left the family and, by extension, himself in. When Adam finally confronted Victor, the exchange was explosive. "You always taught us that weakness is unacceptable," Adam said coldly. "So, what does that make you now?" Victor's eyes flashed with fury. "You think this changes anything?" he growled. "I'm still standing." Adam leaned closer. "No, father. You're just finally alone." The words landed with brutal accuracy, echoing long after Adam walked out. Nikki's victory also sparked a broader conversation throughout Genoa City, one that extended beyond the Newman family and into the lives of women who saw themselves reflected in her struggle. At Crimson Lights, Sharon listened as patrons debated the case, some expressing shock, others gratitude that such truths had been exposed. She thought of her own battles, her own moments of being underestimated or dismissed, and felt a quiet solidarity form. Later, when Nikki stopped by, Sharon embraced her without hesitation. "You did something important," Sharon said. "Not just for yourself." Nikki's eyes filled with tears, not of pain, but of recognition. "I hope so," she whispered. For so long, Nikki had internalized the belief that her worth was tied to Victor's approval, that her strength was conditional. Now, she was redefining herself on her own terms, and the ripple effects were undeniable. As days passed, the legal victory continued to reverberate, forcing Victor into damage control mode. He attempted public statements, carefully worded and legally vetted, framing the divorce as a private matter blown out of proportion, but the narrative no longer belonged to him. The USB drive, Summer's silent weapon, had become almost mythic in status, a reminder that even the most powerful secrets could be undone by a single act of courage. Summer herself faced backlash, particularly from those who viewed loyalty as absolute, but she also received messages from strangers thanking her for speaking up. Each one strengthened her resolve. Even as she braced for the inevitable retaliation she knew Victor was capable of unleashing. In quieter moments, Nikki reflected on the life she had lived and the one now stretching before her, uncharted and uncertain, yet filled with possibility. She redecorated her living space, removing symbols of her past dependency, choosing colors that felt lighter, freer. She enrolled in classes, reignited passions long set aside, and surrounded herself with people who saw her not as an extension of Victor Newman, but as Nikki, artist, survivor, woman. The divorce had not erased her pain, but it had transformed it into something purposeful, something that fueled growth rather than shame. And still, beneath it all, a question lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. What would Victor do next? Those who knew him best understood that humiliation was a wound he would not let fester quietly. Yet this time the landscape had changed. His enemies were emboldened, his allies uncertain, and the woman he once believed he owned had slipped irrevocably beyond his grasp. As Victor stood alone in the Newman ranch one evening, staring at a family portrait that now felt like a relic from another lifetime, he confronted a truth more terrifying than any legal loss: that power without control is meaningless, and control, once broken, can never be fully restored. The saga of Summer's USB drive and NIKKI'S courtroom triumph was far from over. It was merely the opening chapter of a new era in the young and the restless, one defined not by domination, but by reckoning. Genoa City would never be the same, because once the truth was unleashed, there was no returning to the comforting lie that Victor Newman always won. This time, the victory belonged to Nikki, and in claiming it, she changed the rules forever. In the weeks that followed, the emotional aftershocks continued to unfold in ways no one could have fully predicted, weaving themselves into the daily rhythms of Genoa City until the divorce was no longer just a legal event but a living, breathing presence that influenced every conversation, every decision, and every fragile alliance. Nikki found that even ordinary moments now carried a different weight. Walking through Chancellor Park one quiet afternoon, she paused to watch families laugh and children run freely, struck by the realization that for the first time in years, she was not mentally calculating how Victor might react to where she was, who she was with, or what she might say later. The absence of that constant vigilance felt strange, almost unsettling, but also deeply liberating. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the present, understanding that healing was not a destination she had already reached, but a path she was finally allowed to walk without interference. Summer, still processing the magnitude of her actions, began to notice subtle changes in how people treated her. Some admired her bravery, others approached her with cautious politeness, as if unsure whether aligning with her might incur Victor's wrath. At work, she doubled down on her professionalism, determined not to let anyone dismiss her as merely the woman who humiliated Victor Newman in court. Yet late at night, alone with her thoughts, doubt crept in. Had she destroyed her family beyond repair? Was exposing the truth worth the permanent fracture it caused? Each time those questions threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered Nikki's expression in the courtroom, not defeated, but finally seen, and the doubt quieted. Truth, she reminded herself, always comes at a cost, but silence costs more. Victor's response to the loss grew, increasingly inward. Publicly, he maintained his rigid composure, projecting resilience and control, but privately, the erosion of his authority gnawed at him. Longtime associates hesitated before returning his calls, and even those who remained loyal now spoke with a careful neutrality that Victor found infuriating. He began to recognize a shift he had never truly considered before. Fear had been his greatest asset, and once that fear diminished, loyalty became optional. This realization unsettled him far more than the divorce itself. The courtroom defeat was finite. The loss of unquestioned dominance was not. Nick, sensing the emotional vacuum left by the divorce, tried to bridge the widening gaps within the family. He invited Nikki to dinner, creating a space that felt intentionally safe, free from confrontation or agenda. As they talked, Nikki shared stories Nick had never heard, small moments of doubt, quiet compromises she had made to keep the peace, the exhaustion of always being strong enough for Victor. Listening, Nick felt both guilt and clarity. "I should have seen it," he admitted. Nikki reached across the table, squeezing his hand gently. "You were taught not to," she said. "That wasn't your failure." The exchange marked a turning point for Nick, who began to understand that supporting his mother now meant more than just defending her. It meant challenging the patterns that had normalized her suffering. Meanwhile, whispers of Victor's next move circulated through Genoa City like a low hum of anticipation. Some believed he would retaliate through business, others